Hey everybody, this is going to be a video to talk about all the common failure points of the Gen 3 Mitsubishi Montero. That's 2001-2006's alignment system. So there's a series of alignment bolts and hardware that often fail. And the way they fail is like this one. This is a 2001, originally from Chicago. So you have all this rust in here. And here is where in the rear, this is the lower control arm. And right here is where you adjust the camber for the lower control arm for this back wheel. And when you take it in for alignment, you can see that this plate has all these different notches in it, and they can use this to set like the exact degrees and for the alignment that they need to. The problem is that inside of here, inside of the control arm, there's a rubber bushing, and this rubber bushing has an inner metal sleeve and an outer metal sleeve that are laminated to the rubber bushing. And then through that inner metal sleeve comes this bolt. And what happens over time is corrosion and grime gets in here, and this bolt rusts to the inner metal sleeve of the bushing. So when you take your car in to get an alignment, they try cranking on the other side of this bolt to make the adjustment, and it won't move because it is rusted to the bushing, and the bushing is rusted to the control arm, so nothing moves. And it doesn't have to be this bad. It doesn't have to be from like Chicago. Pretty much every Gen 3, if it's from any place other than the super dry Southwest, it's probably going to have this issue if it did not get regular alignments in its life. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, an alignment tech will really crank on this thing to try to get it to move, and all that will then happen is it'll rip the rubber bushing that's back here. It'll just tear that rubber, peel it away from the metal that it's laminated to. Now you've got to replace the bushings too. So let me illustrate this with a bushing real quick. So what we have here is this is kind of what the bushing looks like. This is not actually the bushing. This one's from like a differential, but it's the same exact concept. You've got rubber bushing, inner metal sleeve, outer metal sleeve, and the rubber is laminated to both of those. And then through this, you have your alignment bolt that's gonna go through it. And then this metal rusts to this metal. So when the alignment tech goes to turn this, nothing's going to happen because this cannot just swivel inside the arm. It's a really tight press fit, and then of course over time this metal kind of seizes and rusts to the metal of the control arm that it's pressed into. So that's what's going on there. There's no amount of penetrating oil or anything that you can use to free this up, because that bolt and that bushing, they're way back inside this arm. So it's not going to get in that far. You'll be able to get this nut off, but the bolt's still not going to turn. So on the rear end, here's the ones for the lower control arm. And then up here, you have this toe control arm, this lateral arm, and there's another one here on each side. So that's to adjust the toe. And as you can see, what happens is, here we have a tire that's beautiful on the outside, and as we work our way in, completely bald on the inside. So because this vehicle can't get aligned, it will chew through tires in no time. Like perfect, brand new, expensive, all-terrain tire, completely trashed. So now we are at the front of the vehicle, same exact situation. Here's our lower control arm. There's our alignment bolt, and the front has 4 alignment bolts as well. So the rear had 2 for the rear lower control arms and 2 for the toe control arms. The front, they're all the same. There's 4 of them. So 1, 2, and then same thing on the other side of the arm right there. So a total of 4. Now I should say this isn't just a Gen 3 Montero thing. I mean, this can happen to any independent suspension vehicle. And you know, like I have a Infiniti QX56, which is the same thing as the Nissan Armada. same kind of setup, fully independent suspension, and people run into this problem with those vehicles as well. So how do you fix this problem? Well, you can try taking the nut off and then hammering the bolt to see if you can knock it out. Chances of that working are pretty slim, just because when it seizes to that inner sleeve, it really seizes on there. And so what often ends up happening is people have to cut these bolts with like a Sawzall. You're gonna need a carbide tipped blade, or angle grinders like with a big disc on there. I've seen those used as well. So you're basically gonna need to cut these bolts out to then knock them out of where they're seized in the arm. And you know, if the bushing gets too trashed in the process, then you'll obviously need to replace the bushings as well. All right, so let's talk about the factory parts that are used to solve this issue. So here's what you got. You've got 3 different bolts, and I'll have all this stuff linked in the description, so no need to worry about getting these part numbers right now. But there's basically 3 bolts. For the front 4 bolts are all the same for the front lower control arms. Then you've got the 2 for the rear lower control arms and the 2 for the rear toe control arms. Now, all of the bolts are basically the same. The only difference is the length. But in terms of everything else, they're pretty much identical. Also, a little handy tip for you. The bolt, like if you've got these out of the package and you're trying to figure out where they go, they are marked on the top. You can see this one says T. That's for the toe control arm of the rear suspension. And then the ones for the rear lower control arms will have an L, and the ones for the front lower control arms will have an F for front. So those are the bolts. And then on the other side of this bolt that goes through the arm, you'll have this plate with all the, you know, this is the eccentric that allows it to adjust. And then you will have a nut as well. Now the plate and the nuts, these things can often be reused if they're not super rusty. Like on that one that I just showed you from Chicago, these may not be able to be reused, and so we stock these as well. So now let's talk about the bushings that we carry to solve this problem as well. So starting off with the one that is probably the most popular, that is going to be, and again, I'll have all these part numbers linked in the description, but that's going to be the 2057K by Super Pro. And then this bushing here, there's 2 of them. You can see, here it is right here, and it's poly, and it works in either the rear lower control arm location or in the rear toe control arm location. It's the same bushing. So if you buy one of these kits, you're gonna get 2. So you could use those 2 wherever you want. If you were gonna doing all 4 rear alignment bolts and their associated bushings, then you need to order 2 of these to get 4 bushings. And basically, I'll just take a different bushing as an example. These Super Pro bushings have an inner sleeve that is not laminated to the bushing itself. So when you assemble this, they come with grease, and there's actually, I'll see if I can get it on camera, like you see that knurling inside of there? That helps retain the grease and keep it captured in there. And then you'll basically load in these inner sleeves, and that way, even if the alignment bolt that goes through here, even if it rusts to this metal inner sleeve, and I'd recommend putting like some anti-seize on that bolt when you put it in there, but even if it does rust to the inner sleeve, it's not going to matter, because since the sleeve is not laminated to the bushing, it'll always be able to turn. You'll never run into that problem where you can't get an alignment done. So that's the basic design that all of these have. And they vary slightly, but again, this one can be used in either rear location. Next up, we have the 2056, and what it has inside of this kit is the exact same bushings as the 2057. 2 of those are the exact same, but then it also has some other bushings that are used for the outer location of the rear lower control arm. So basically, this kit is if you want to refresh the rear lower control arms completely. You want to do not just the inner location where the alignment bolt goes through, but also the outer location where that rear lower control arm bolts to the knuckle. But
It's not a super popular kit for people to buy because the bushing that goes in the knuckle on that side, it's not attached to the rear lower control arm. So when you pull that control arm out of the vehicle, the outside bushing is not going to come with it. It's going to be in the knuckle and you need to press it out through there. But if you wanted to just refresh the lower control arms completely, both sides, we carry this as well. And then for the front, it's this one, SPF 4634K, and inside you're going to get 4 bushings, 4 inner sleeves, and the grease, and these are for the front lower control arms. Here's what they look like. These ones have a little bit of an outer metal sleeve. The previous 2 that we talked about, they don't have any kind of metal on the outside that you would have to worry about seizing to the arm itself. They're just straight poly, but obviously they felt like this needed more reinforcement. There was a lot of torque on that front lower control arm. But again, even if this does seize to the actual control arm, it doesn't matter because the inner sleeve is always going to be able to turn, so you're always going to be able to get your alignment done. Now let's talk about the last one. This is the SPF 4669K. Kind of a rare use case for this one. It also goes on the rear lower control arms where the alignment bolts go through. But unlike the previous bushings that we talked about, like the 2056K or the 2057, these ones are made if you have too much lift and you can't get your vehicle into alignment. These bushings are offset, and so they can provide plus or minus 0.75 degrees of camber adjustment. And this is usually only needed in a few different scenarios. It's if you got to have more than 2.25, 2.5-ish inches of lift on the rear. And this usually only happens in like some rare cases. So that would be number one, if you got HD springs, but you don't have the minimum amount of weight that you have to be in spec for those springs, which I understand. Like you might be planning to build a full kitchen, put a rooftop tent, add on all this extra added constant weight, but it's not on there yet, and you've already done your lift and everything, and so you want to get the springs that are going to accommodate that extra weight. But in the meantime, you may not be able to get it into alignment because those springs don't have the required amount of minimum weight that they're designed for on there, and that's where these bushings will come into play. You can see how the hole is offset there to create more camber adjustment. The other scenario that these bushings might come in handy is if you have a 2001, 2002 XLS model. That model weighs less, and we've seen that if people go with even just the extra raised height springs that we carry, that it can create too much lift, especially once you start deleting like your third row seats, for example, your second row seats. We've had guys, gut those things, and then you're taking weight out of the vehicle, and it's obviously going to sit higher as a result. And third is if you start combining lifts. If you have raised height springs and spacers, then again, you're just creating too much lift. That's when this is going to come into play to solve those alignment problems. I mean, not to knock the Montero, like to have 2 to 2.25 inches lift and the factory alignment bolts still have enough adjustability in them to accommodate for that is still really, really good. Now, along the same lines as having too much lift in the rear, if you have too much lift in the front, we have a solution for that as well. But it's even more rare that this comes into play because the front has more, it allows for more height, more lift before the stock adjusters run out of room. So I feel like it's got to be over 2.5 inches, closer to 3 inches of lift in the front. If you run into that, we don't have them yet, but they'll be here soon. And that's upper control arms with built-in camber correction for lifted vehicles. I'm running them on my 2005, testing them out, and then they're looking good, and we'll be bringing these in as well. So I hope that makes sense, you guys. This pretty much covers the reasons why this happens and what you can do to fix it. And if we're talking about preventing it, my advice to you would be to, get those bolts greased with some anti-seize, and then also just get regular alignments. Like if you get an alignment once a year, then it doesn't have as much time for that rust and corrosion to take hold and create this issue. But the good news is, if it does affect you, once you get poly bushings with floating inner sleeves, it can't happen ever again. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.